বৰঠাকুৰ IS একাডেমি প্ৰস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা।
Hello everyone, this is Funny. Welcome to Bordhakur IAS Academy. This is our daily Hindu analysis class. Let us begin with the first article today. So the first article for today is new initiative in Jammu and Kashmir to restore lost glory of Pashmina shawls. Now Pashmina refers to, it is a fine variant of spun cashmere. Right, you get that wool from Kashmir goats and you spun it into a thread and you make cloths out of it or cloth items out of it, particularly shawls and sweaters. Similarly, Pashmina is also a type of cashmere wool which is obtained from undercoats of a goat called Changtangi goat. Now in Persian, the Pash means wool and that is how it got its name. So this wool is spun from domesticated Changtangi goats, right? That is Pashmina wool and Pashmina shawls. You make shawls out of those spun threads. That is how you get Pashmina shawls. Now, as I said, it is a special breed of goat which is again indigenous to high altitude regions of both Ladakh and Jammu and Kashmir. Remember, if you remember the initial skirmish between India and China, you might have read an article in the Hindu newspaper pointing out to the fact that the people who were rearing these Changtangi goats in the higher altitudes of Ladakh, they cannot take their domesticated goats to grazing areas because it is highly dangerous. They were saying that because of the standoff between India and China, their ability to earn a livelihood was lost because of this condition, this hostility. They cannot take their domesticated goats to those traditional grazing areas in the summer time. So that was one article that was highlighted. So you can link up that article with this article. Now, the only reason where or why these Changtangi goats are raised or domesticated or reared in these parts of the world, parts of India, is they want to make or they want to harvest wool from these goats. That is how you get Pashmina wool, which is a variety of cashmere again. Now, these are nomadic communities and they are particularly limited to the regions of Changtangi region of Greater Ladakh, but you can also find them in Jammu and Kashmir. Now the idea is these communities rear these animals, these domesticated goats. They harvest wool from these animals and they then send it to Jammu and Kashmir, where this wool is spun into a fine Pashmina thread, and again it is knitted or because this has to be done through hands, they weave by hand and they make shawls, they make sweaters and they make other clothing items. Now these goats, because of the nature of the fiber, because of the quality of the fiber, and also the hand woven quality of the fiber, meaning every product is unique in the sense that it has to be handmade. It is not a mechanized process. So because of this, the prices of the quality of cloth items that are made out of cashmere or Pashmina wool are high. So in a sense, because of their quality and because of the demand, these Changtangi goats kind of revitalized the economy of that region, which was very much poor earlier. Now it gave them an opportunity to earn a proper living and a respectable living. Now the raw Pashmina which is harvested from these animals, right, these goats, is exported to Kashmir, where they are processed. Not only the thread itself is special, the process through which the cloth items are created is also special. Because of the fineness of the thread, it cannot be done through a mechanical process. It has to be done through hand. So what they do is they hand weave each and every cloth item with their own hand, which involves a lot of time and also a lot of speciality. So it is done by a specialized team of craftsmen and women. So this sector in Jammu and Kashmir, particularly the people who hand weave Kashmir and Pashmira shawls or sweaters, is predominantly dominated by women, right? Because of the scarcity, many fake items were also sold throughout India and the world. To prevent that thing from happening and prevent their livelihood being destroyed by fakes, the Bureau of Indian Standard has also published certain standards and has recognized the quality and standards of these Pashmina shawls. So they are recognized. Not only that, to protect their identity, the Pashmina shawls were also given GI tags by the government of India. So the entire thing is an industry there, right? It is a small industry which allows women of that region to be empowered. But because of the regional conditions or instability in the region, over the years, women who were associated with this hand spinning of yarns of Pashmina shawls has significantly gone down. So again, you are losing a cultural identity because of instability. Now, through a mixture of government intervention and private participation, we are seeing this sector being revitalized and re-energized in that region. Remember, once it is lost, it is lost. The cultural identity of this region, which is known for its fineness, which is known for its craftsmanship, and again the quality goes and we cannot revive it. Now, in order to protect the traditional and cultural identity of this region and this particular trade, now through government intervention and private participation, now they are creating a center for excellence by a particular shawl trader who is trying to revitalize the entire sector and craft there. Now what they are trying to do is they are trying to restore the entire traditional process to its roots, meaning it is going to be done in a traditional way. They are going to provide employment. They are going to provide the spinning wheels that are required to earn make the yarns out of it, and also they are going to give employment by way of placing orders in advance, so that these women who wish to participate in this program will have enough employment, and also they can make a respectable livelihood out of this endeavor. So in essence, what they are trying to do is they are trying to revive the hand driven process of weaving shawls, and they are trying to revive the weaving industry, that is shawl weaving industry in this region. So which is a welcome sign. Now, because as I told you, the participation of women in shawl weaving has come down significantly from 1 lakh to just around 10,000 in the Kashmir Valley. Remember, when these women were employed, it was a direct woman empowerment movement, right? The moment they lost their ability to make a living through this process, their hope of having a better livelihood, an independent livelihood, and a respectable life is also taken away. In essence, this scheme, the Center for Excellence initiative, is an woman empowerment scheme, because the scheme directly targets women, right? They are going to subsidize the machinery that women need to get into this industry. Not only that, they are going to ensure that the product which is being created by them or manufactured by them is already purchased, right? There is a security and a guarantee that whatever you can manufacture today is going to be purchased. You don't have to sit on stock, or you don't have to sit on that uncertainty whether you will be able to sell your product or not. Not only that, the government is also giving subsidy to them, right? So not only that, the government is also ensuring certain security and safeguards to the people who are employed in this industry. The first thing is they are going to be given minimum wages for their work. Not only that, they are also going to be guaranteed minimum support price for their products, and particularly for the GI certified plain pashmina hand spun and hand woven shawls. So they are giving minimum wage and they are also ensuring minimum support price for their product. Add to these two things the Center for Excellence, which is going to ensure that your product is going to be sold, or your product purchasal is going to be guaranteed. And second thing, whatever the initial infrastructure or machinery that you need upfront to spun wool to yarn will be given to you for free, or at least in the initial phases. Later on they can purchase it, or they can pay minimal amount to get their machinery. Again, two things. First, you are protecting the cultural identity, right? This is a cultural identity. It is a traditional hand weaving industry that could not sustain on its own because of the uncertainties and various other reasons. Two, you are bringing government intervention. You are bringing in private participation. That means that it can be profitable and it won't be a burden on the government finances on one hand. Two, the product can have wider market access with a private participation, which wouldn't have happened if only government was involved. With this, you are empowering women of Jammu and Kashmir, particularly the Srinagar area where this industry is predominantly located. Not only that, you are also having an impact on the nomadic people who rear these Changtangi goats, because you are ensuring a demand for their wool. So it is again a supply chain link up. That means one party is dependent on other party. So it is a sustaining mechanism. As long as these people are successfully selling their product, hand weaving their product, the demand for wool is always there. So those people are also taken care. So the primary thing that we have to look, or the primary lens through which we have to look at this issue, is women empowerment in Jammu and Kashmir. So once you see a society where women are empowered in any means possible, you generally tend to see socio-economic changes in that society for positive. So that is one way where we could tackle the issues that people of or the society of Jammu and Kashmir suffers from, right? So again, this is an important development in that regard. So moving on to the next article, China cuts time minors can spend on online games. So this is an interesting development from the Chinese side. So recently the Chinese government brought in new regulations where they slashed the amount of time players can spend on online games, particularly children who are aged under 18 years. They are limiting the time children below 18 years can spend on online games or offline games. Particularly, they are trying to curtail gaming to just 1 hour a day in weekends and holidays. So that is, a child can spend a minimum of 1 hour on weekends, that is Friday, Saturday, and other holidays, or Sunday also. Now, recently the Chinese government has been carrying out kind of a crackdown on digital media companies. We have heard news, we have heard instances where they were going after Alibaba, AliExpress, and other digital media companies, and they have been particularly targeting online gaming companies too, because they feel that these kinds of games were making the youth of China violent and useless, in the sense their observation was that astute and that simple. They were simply looking at it from the point of view of children getting addicted to these games, which was a huge problem where where they were seeing large cases of online addiction to these games, particularly from younger sections of the society. So they started this crackdown. Now online companies are barred from providing gaming services to these kids, right? Even they cannot do it from outside also. Outside in the sense that they cannot use other servers or nothing like that. They have to bar these children from accessing online games. So these companies can provide access under or during only the permitted time periods, that is 1 hour during Fridays, weekdays and holidays. Now you can look it from different perspective. You can say it is wrong, on the other hand you can say it is right. Depending on your personal experience, you might agree with it or you might not agree with it. So depending on your personal experience, whether you might agree with it or not, that is in regards to this issue. The second thing that we can discuss about this issue is, should India follow suit? uh, can India bring in similar laws in our country? Can the government of India bring in similar restrictions on people accessing online games? The recent episode where we can kind of draw comparisons is access to online gambling. If you remember correctly, Tamil Nadu government brought in an amendment to an age-old act that made online gambling illegal, right? They outrightly banned online gambling websites. The reason Tamil Nadu government gave for their actions was that people were getting addicted to this online gambling. As a result of this, they were destroying their life. What the Chennai High Court did, it simply struck down that amendment and said that the government cannot impose arbitrary restrictions on individual rights. Right, but the scenario might be different, but the reasoning is along the same lines, right? The Tamil Nadu government was observing that people were getting addicted to this gambling, online gambling platforms, and they were losing their livelihood. On the other hand, China is saying that kids underaged were getting addicted to these online games, and not only that, through that process they were giving a reason that these children were being exposed to violent acts which they wouldn't have been exposed otherwise. So that is one area that I kind of find similarities with, where but remember, in the Tamil Nadu case, the High Court of Tamil Nadu struck down the provisions of Tamil Nadu government's amendment, stating that you cannot do that. There are certain limitations. You cannot simply outrightly ban something because your reasoning is also because just you find it to be made out of an ethical or moral roots. What I mean to say is, the Tamil Nadu government felt that it was their moral obligation to protect its citizens from online gambling and the subsequent fallout of online gambling, where they were losing their livelihood or their life savings. So that moral component is always a complicated issue. You cannot make decisions based on moral bearings, because your moral base might be different from other person or other individual's moral foundation. So not everyone shares a similar moral foundation. So again, that debate also gets complicated and very murky very quickly. So we are seeing similar things happening in India, where we are seeing youth, particularly below 18 to be specific, where they are getting addicted to certain games that we don't want to name here, but nonetheless you all are aware of what games I am talking about. So this issue though looks simple, not relevant to us, but it is entirely relevant to us because it brings out a debate as to should the government of India also bring in similar laws where they don't ban the entire thing altogether, but at least curtail access to it, right? So that there is a limit on how people can interact with those addictive games that the Chinese government is terming to be very unhealthy for its youth. So moving on to the important article for today, that is the editorial, Still Hanging Fire on Transparency. This article deals with two themes. One is the criminalization of politics, second, electoral bonds and transparency in politics. Now let us first deal with criminalization of politics. What is criminalization of politics? Criminalization of politics means where criminals enter into political ecosystem by way of participating or contesting in elections. In most cases, they even get elected to parliamentary or state legislature or even in local body governments. So to simply put, criminalization of politics means criminals getting into politics, contesting in elections and getting elected for public office. That is what criminalization of politics means. Now, that is a big problem because there are a lot of disadvantages of criminalization of politics. So one of the areas or one of the institutions in India that has been trying to address this issue is Indian judiciary system, that is Supreme Court. Supreme Court, in one of its judgments, there were many other cases that were kind of related to criminalization of politics, but during one of its judgments, it called criminalization of politics an extremely disastrous and lamentable situation because it raised concerns about unsettlingly increasing trend of criminalization of politics in our country, which is in a sense true. There was this report or analysis called Association of Democratic Reforms. They came out with a report a few years back that kind of put the entire discussion on criminalization of politics at the forefront because the findings of that report were a little bit concerning. They compared data from 2004 to 2009. According to ADR report, the number of candidates with criminal charges or criminal backgrounds had double the chance of winning compared to other candidates who had clean backgrounds. That is one conclusion that they arrived at. And the data is also a little bit concerning. In 2004, 24% of members of parliament, MPs that is, had criminal cases pending against them. That is in 2004. But in 2009, that number or that percentage went up to 30%. Again, in recent times, in 2014, 34% of MPs were or had criminal cases pending against them. And again, when the data was consolidated or collected in 2019, the number shot up to 43%, meaning in 2019, as many as 43% of MPs had criminal cases pending against them. Now that is the current scenario of Indian political system. You are having anywhere between 40 to 45% of MPs or elected officials in public office having criminal cases pending against themselves. As I said, the Supreme Court found this to be extremely disastrous and lamentable situation. Over the period of time, Supreme Court has taken certain stance against criminalization of properties, right? The first instance where the Supreme Court kind of was trying to address this issue but not directly was through bringing in was in 2013, particularly the Union of Civil Liberties versus Union of India case, that was in 2013, where they brought in the option of nota. Remember nota? None of the above option, right? That was giving citizens an opportunity to express their displeasure over the candidates that were being fielded by various political parties. So nota system was one of the ways that though it was not directly related to, may not be related to criminalization of politics, but at least it was talking about giving voters an option when no candidate who were participating in that election or in that area were suitable enough to be voted into office. That was in 2003. But recently the pace with which the Supreme Court has been or the judiciary has been trying to address this issue has increased. In 2017, the Supreme Court asked the central government to frame a scheme or appoint a special court through which these politicians who had cases against them can be tried in a speedy and faster manner, right? That was the thing that Supreme Court asked the central government, but it didn't materialize. Now again in 2018, in a case called Public Interest Foundation versus Union of India, the Supreme Court directed political parties to publish online the pending criminal cases of their candidates. So again, no compliance from the political parties. Now, not only that, there was this case in 2002 where the court directed that persons who were declaring affidavits for their candidature, when they were declaring their affidavits in the for their election, they must not only declare their educational details, they must also declare their financial details and their criminal backgrounds. What was the reaction from the political parties? In unison, they went and amended the People's Act of or Representation of People's Act of 1957, where they themselves exempted from this clause. Rightly so, the Supreme Court of India struck down that amendment, restoring the previous rule. Now, at any point of time when some sort of an correction or course correction is being tried or forced to come up with, in unison, the political parties have been resisting it. Right, but the final straw seems to be in the year 2020, when in February of 2020, after multiple judgments where they found zero to little compliance from political parties, the courts have asked the political parties to not only publish the records of their candidates, criminal records of their candidates, but has also asked them to state the reason as to why you selected such candidates. Right? That was very interesting, right? The Supreme Court in 2020 said that, okay, you are selecting candidates, but tell us the reason as to why you are selecting this specific candidate, and also state the reason as to why you are rejecting the other candidate. You must publish those reasons online also. Again, political parties failed to comply, but this time they warned, meaning the Supreme Court warned, that if political parties fail to comply to this judgment, you are going to be held, or you are going to be under the court's contempt. Right? It is going to issue contempt orders, and it is going to issue direction against political parties who fail to comply to its orders. Now, this was in 2002. Then came the Bihar elections, where certain procedures that were laid down by the court were kind of followed, but they used the wider definitions of the judgment to circumnavigate the order altogether. For example, one of the condition was that political parties must publish their candidate's criminal record in one regional paper and one in national paper. The court order did not specify the minimum circulation number or the circulation of an individual any paper, right? It didn't set any conditions. So what political parties did, they chose papers that had little to no circulation, and they published those details in those papers. So what is the point of publishing details when the newspaper doesn't have any readers at all, or even if they have, the number is very minimal. Not only that, they wanted each candidate to submit a sworn affidavit giving financial details and their criminal cases. In addition to that, the party must put all the details of their candidates, criminal details of their candidates, on social media and on its website, and these information should be accessible to anyone and everyone, and they were directed to create a special tab on their political websites so that the information is front and center. So, on one hand, you have the Supreme Court of India trying to address this issue. On the other hand, you have political parties that were trying to escape the issue, right? They were trying to circumnavigate whatever the Supreme Court of India was trying to come up with. So that is where one friction point still exists. 2001 Bihar, after the Bihar elections, the court was very kind of the word that should be used is angry, because they threatened the parties that they are going to issue contempt notices against every party. And even if the court, even if the parties do not adhere to the contempt proceedings, they are going to seize the political symbols and everything of any party that didn't adhere to its ruling. Now, this is the criminalization of politics. The second concept, a theme that this article deals is electoral bonds. So, what is the story with electoral bonds also? And again, electoral bonds have, when they were brought in the initial phases, they did address certain issues in political financing or election financing, but they also left room for a lot to be asked for, in the sense that they did not answer all of the problems that were plaguing the finances of Indian elections. Right? What are electoral bonds? Electoral bonds are simply instruments that are primarily used to donate funds to political parties in our country. Whatever the parties, you can use electoral bonds to donate. There are certain conditions on where you can buy it or when you can buy it, but nonetheless, anybody can buy a predetermined amount of political bonds. There are certain, like how 10 rupees, 50 rupees, like that, there are predetermined numbers, meaning prices, for which you can buy electoral bonds and you can donate it to any political party that you wish for. Now, what are the features of this electoral bonds? They are issued by recognized banks. In India, it is presently it is State Bank of India, right? State Bank of India, primarily State Bank of India. Anybody can approach the bank and buy political electoral bonds. The big advantage in electoral bonds is the identity of the donor is secret. It doesn't bear any name of the donor, and though they can be tracked through digital payments, because the only way you can buy electoral bonds is through checks or digital transactions. That way you can track them. Otherwise, there is no other way to know who had donated how much to political parties through electoral bonds. The way it kind of cleaned the process is that whatever the money that was coming from unwanted sources, right? I don't want to use the word black money, but unclean money. Let us use the word unclean money. Whatever the money that was coming from unclean sources, now it no longer can be brought into this system, because everything has to be done through either digital transactions or checks which can be traced. So that is one aspect. The second aspect, or the second criticism that electoral bonds have, is the anonymousness, right? Nobody knows how much is being given by somebody. They have taken away certain restrictions also, where foreign companies can donate. Earlier there was a restriction that only companies that were making profit can donate. That was taken away, meaning companies which were making losses can also now donate through electoral bonds. There were many other safeguards that were put, but later on taken away, making the process even more questionable at times. Earlier there was kind of in electoral bonds, the donor can choose to reveal their name, reveal their identity or not. It is upon the donor to reveal or identify themselves or not. The application is part of the donor. The political party cannot do anything on that front. Now, as I said, the electoral bond scheme was brought in to check unclean money entering into Indian political system. But with that, there came many other challenges. One, as I said, bonds can be purchased from State Bank of India. Who controls State Bank of India? Government of India. So whoever is in power can have access to electoral bonds. Right, a list of people who purchased electoral bonds, so they can track individuals or donors from that side. Second, it doesn't answer all of the problems of this issue of unwanted money in Indian politics. When Supreme Court of India, when this thing was being tested in the courts, the Supreme Court of India asked the Election Commission of India in regard of its opinion about electoral bonds. So the Election Commission of India did not oppose these bonds, but they were concerned about certain aspects of the anonymity. And not only that, they went on to say that this is one step. They didn't want this to be banned. Right, that was the thing. When Supreme Court was planning to ban electoral bonds, the Election Commission of India went to Supreme Court and said that please don't ban it, because this is one step further from whatever the previous system was. At least it is a little bit improvement over the earlier system. So that is the issue with electoral bonds, and that is that are the challenges with electoral bonds also. So to simply put, Indian political system lacks transparency. It lacks transparency in the financing aspect of it. And the second is the trend of criminalization of politics. These are the two worrying scenarios or trends that are emerging out of Indian politics. So as I said, electoral bonds have dealt a further blow to people's right. They kind of consolidated the role of big money in electoral politics. Again, there was another case in 2013, but again, we made enough examples in the sense as to how political parties united against complying with court directions. Now, what should be the way forward? There is a clear lack of political will in this issue. If they wanted to address the criminalization of politics and unwanted money in politics, political parties through legislation can bring in bills in parliament to amend existing laws, because remember, existing laws are enough to address this issue. You don't need new laws to be brought in to address these issues. What we need in existing laws is more freedom to navigate for Election Commission of India and more information access to people through RTI or any other law. Now you need to amend these laws so that it increases transparency in the process. Because people have the right to know where their political parties get their money from, how they are functioning, what were the reasons as to why they chose an individual over the other. But that access is not available to Indian population. That is what the courts have been trying to address, and we have seen ample cases or ample examples as to how political parties were trying to resist this. So the way forward is the judiciary must put considerable pressure on the political parties. Not only that, it must empower Election Commission of India to further increase its ambit and scrutiny over political parties, its candidates, and their finances. Clearly, we need an overhaul of not only a single system but the entire ecosystem. That is how you address this issue. So these are the important articles for today. Thank you. Stay safe. Namaste.
বৰঠাকুৰ IAS একাডেমি প্ৰস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা।
বৰঠাকুৰ IAS একাডেমি।